Cool. All right, I think we will jump in. We're starting to get a nice crowd here. So welcome everyone to the Enhance Your Psychedelic Therapy Practice, the event here with expert advice. I want to start by thanking a couple of folks. I want to thank Henry Winslow at Tricycle Day for helping give us a boost there, and David Drapkin at Vital and Psychedelics Today, a wonderful resource there. We're chatting about some educational partnerships, and also we will be donating today $100, a modest sum, but as an honorarium to Porta Sophia on behalf of our panelists. Porta Sophia does great work with psychedelic prior art, making sure that there aren't patents that patent things that already really belong to the public. Doing a wonderful service out there. So I want to thank the panelists for being here today, and I'm going to do a round of introductions, and then we'll jump into the content, the questions, and all the exciting stuff. So, our first panelist is legal expert Natasha Sumner. She is senior counsel at Husch Blackwell law firm, and she was a founding member of their psychedelics department. She supports clients throughout the entire drug development process, from early research to clinical trial approval and final public supply authorizations. She has extensive experience assisting clients in securing the necessary approvals to research controlled Schedule I substances and advising on the establishment and launch of studies and formal clinical trials. Natasha has also helped with new drug applications to the FDA. She is well versed in historical and current psychedelic research, including FDA-approved studies on MDMA and psilocybin for mental health and end-of-life issues, as well as the legalization and decriminalization of psilocybin in various cities and states. She's enthusiastic about the potential of these drugs to treat and potentially cure a variety of mental health needs, and is fascinated by the drug development process. Can everyone welcome Natasha for us? Welcome. All right. And then we have our finance expert, Jeffrey Krepps, LMHCA. He's a practitioner and business expert, co-founder, chief business development officer of Advaya Health and Wellness. With deep experience in healthcare business practices, Jeff will offer guidance on managing costs, achieving financial sustainability, and some background on Jeffrey. Extensive expertise in leading, designing, and expanding various healthcare organizations. Proven operational leadership and business development track record. He's been responsible for P&L management, of up to 400 employees, 22 million in annual revenue, and also lead support executive for a 700 employee and $45 million organization. He's executed growth plans to build profitable multi-site clinically specialized operational units. So he has that broad sort of corporate expertise, but also really finely tuned to the details of practicing as he's a practitioner. He values community service and is dedicated to creating sustainable business models that foster win-win scenarios and partnerships. A pragmatist in daily execution and values-driven optimist, he's committed to the well-being of organizations and communities. So everybody, welcome Jeffrey Krepps. Yay! And we are honored here, last but not least, to have marketing expert Steen Beck from Tricycle Day. I think most of you are familiar with Tricycle Day. Very exciting success story in psychedelics. And Steen is a seasoned marketing strategist. Steen will provide insights on building your brand, reaching your audience, and effectively communicating the benefits of psychedelic therapy. Steen builds, manages, and optimizes ad campaigns on a variety of social media: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it. And he does this for business and artists in the US, Canada, and Japan. So he's currently collaborating with purpose-driven marketing agencies and individual companies. He uses resonance marketing to amplify the impact of conscious organizations, and his focus is on helping clients who prioritize issues such as climate change, healing mental and physical illness, optimizing human potential, and igniting a conscious revolution. Outside of work, Steen enjoys spending time outdoors with his dog, slacklining, listening to history podcasts, video games, concerts, and festivals. He loves meeting and connecting with new people, which is what we're doing here today, and feel free to reach out to Steen anytime. Let's welcome Steen. All right. And so the format today is we're going to have each of our panelists in the order they were introduced go through some foundational information, just talk about kind of their context, their perspective on these business questions, what's good, what to look out for. Then we have some of those questions that came in with some degree of frequency. We'll start off with those, and then we'll open up the floor for everybody to ask questions live. Does that sound fun, exciting, agreeable, and a good way to spend a Friday? Yay! All right, without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Natasha.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and for those folks who aren't here but are going to listen to this, hi. Thanks so much for inviting me here. I don't know if I'm an expert, but it's an area that I certainly is very near and dear to my heart. I've been, following the psychedelic research for many, many, many years, and then saw an opportunity to actually incorporated into my legal practice, which is very, very exciting. So kind of just foundationally, you know, um, this is a complicated legal area, as I'm sure all of you know to some degree. And what's most complicated about it is that, all of these, except for ketamine, all of these drugs, I like to call them medications, but they're all Schedule One. I mean, maybe cannabis will be moving or has moved. I don't follow cannabis. It's a little bit of a different sort of area than for me. I really follow the medicinal piece to it. That's the part that's most important to me. So I really follow the Schedule One MDMA, psilocybin, DMT, those. And so, I'm sure many of you, maybe all of you, know what happened recently with the MDMA, the NDA, and sort of following that. And I'm happy to. I don't have a lot of insight. Obviously, I know as much as everybody else in terms of, hearing, watching, seeing what happened. But obviously that's it. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact long term, but certainly in the short term, it could if the FDA chooses not to. If the FDA chooses to follow what the advisory committee has voted. But the challenge, of course, is that right now everything is Schedule One. You have states, many states that have either decriminalized or have legalized. Some of these, mostly psilocybin, and sort of the interplay between federal and state law. And as boring as that is, it's really, really, really important because, as practitioners, you all, of course, want to make sure that your license and all the things that are important to you are, not put at risk, right? So right now, where we are is really at a federal level, things are illegal. And we hope that this changes in the near future. Um, so from a business perspective, if you're a therapist, really the only drug that you really can legally work with is ketamine. Now, and I do not practice in Oregon, so I don't know all of the Oregon situation that's been happening there, but there is like a setup there, as I'm sure many, if not all of you know about. And I do think it's a little bit different from the perspective of the federal government when you have a state saying, hey, this is a state sponsored like program, and we're sort of, um, but all that to say, it's still illegal. And so if you are in a state other than Oregon, being very mindful of the fact that it's not legal, even microdosing. You'd be surprised. I get that question a lot. Even microdosing is illegal at the federal level. Now, does that mean the DEA is going to come after you? No. But we're here to talk about, at least my portion is what's legal, what's not legal. So from that perspective, that's sort of where we are. I'll leave it at that for now, and then I'll pass off and let the other folks, and then we can come back and talk about kind of the more of the specifics of when MDMA is legalized, what will that look like? So I'll be happy to kind of talk about that next, but I'll pass for some overview to Jeffrey.
Alrighty, thank you, Natasha. Very cool to learn about you and to be on this panel with you. And thanks, Eric, for the opportunity to present. I'm super stoked to be here, and I'm super stoked to be here alive in the world right now in the face of a changing environment in regards to the public perception of psychedelics and the utilization of psychedelics in the medicinal area. I am here today and kind of walk you through some business fundamentals in terms of, how to kind of responsibly start a business or responsibly kind of kick off your business, kind of doing the right things to control costs, doing the right things in order to make sure that your cash flow is in alignment. But fundamentally, I think that even before that, stepping back, it's really important to think about your practice, whether you've got a practice now or you're looking to start your own practice, to align yourself with your passions where it is in this space. Get into business for something that you want to do for yourself, that you want to do for the world, and then let this is not KPIs or I didn't learn this in MBA school, but just kind of follow your bliss a little bit and do what you're really, really passionate about. Learn the business fundamentals, and those doors are going to open up for you. So, especially if your heart is in the right place, you want to help people, you want to expand these services, these modalities, expand consciousness, put that out there with your best foot forward. We're all representing this movement, and I really appreciate the opportunity that we have today and together in this space in order to build out this kind of, magical moment. It's important for all of us to be responsible and help keep this thing on its rails. There is I'm very deeply grateful for the underground that has been working in this scene for quite a while. And we're interfacing, as with Natasha saying, with some legalities and where are we at with the federal government and things like that. Just kind of be safe, keep your patients safe, keep your clients safe if you're going to work in the underground. And if you're looking to bridge that gap into ketamine or, maybe some other bridge therapies like IFS or EMDR or transpersonal counseling, some of these things that are, more depth-based in terms of the approach, go for that as well. But by all means, I'm excited to be here today and to present and hopefully help you guys, guys and gals and everyone to, build out that practice that you want to build and do it in a mindful and a conscious way that's in alignment with your vision and values. Thanks so much. And we'll go to Steen.
Cool. Thanks, Jeffrey. Again, everyone, I'm Steen Beck. I focus on marketing, specifically paid social. So what that means is sometimes when you're on, say that you're on Instagram or Facebook or anything like that, you'll see your friends' posts come. And so that's called organic social. What I focus on is paid social. So while I can still speak to all aspects of marketing, if you really want to get into the nitty gritty with me, it's going to be more so about like meta advertising platform, like how you could reach out for potential patients, and on other platforms as well. So again, happy to talk about all aspects of marketing. And one thing I should mention is if I get too into the marketing jargon, feel free to stop me. I'm talking to marketers all the time, every day. So I may get too into it. So I'll try to stop myself as best as possible. But yeah, and then and one thing I wanted to mention before we get into all the questions was that if any of you want to go a little bit deeper, please feel free to email me. I'll leave that in the chat as well. And Eric, thank you so much for hosting this. It's an awesome opportunity. Thanks.
Awesome. All right. Well, there's the team. And what I want to do is jump into some of the questions because that'll get to the foundational information that's most relevant. And again, I want to encourage folks in the chat. This is a chance you've got experts here that access to ask any questions you have, particular to your practice. So get those in as we go along. And we will jump to the first most common question, and this is for Natasha. This question came in from AT, a clinical psychologist. What should I be aware of, legally speaking, before I dive into adding psychedelic therapy to my practice?
Yeah, great question. We get this question all the time. So the first is, what drug are you using? So again, if you're using ketamine, which many people do, there are some med spa type styles, not really my favorite. I think there's a lot of issues with that, but there are actually real practitioners using ketamine in a very, I think as Jeffrey said, in a very responsible and sort of ethical way. So if you want to use ketamine, great. That's legal. Obviously you need to have the right folks you need a DEA license. And so at the federal level, you've got your DEA license. Ketamine is a Schedule III drug. And then you need to have the right folks who are owning the practice. So there is something called the corporate practice of medicine. It's super boring title, but it's really, really important. So depending on the state that you're in, some states preclude a non-physician from owning a medical practice and using this type of therapy, at least ketamine now, which is the only legal. You're going to hear me say that a lot, and I know it's annoying, but I say it because sometimes it doesn't quite sink in because there's so much in the media about this. And so it's confusing especially for non-lawyers to understand the difference between federal and state law. So ketamine right now, that's the legal one. So it's important to understand because using drugs like ketamine is considered the practice of medicine, even if you are using it for a mental health reason. It is being used off-label because ketamine is not approved for depression or for any other mental health. So it's considered the practice of medicine. So depending on the state that you're in, you may need to there are ways to, I don't want to say get around, but there are ways to work within a state where only a physician is allowed to own a medical practice. But it's a little bit more complicated. You will need a lawyer to do that. And it gets a little bit more costly. But for the states that, don't require that, then, a therapist plus you'll need to have a physician because you need somebody who can prescribe. And some states do allow non-physicians like a nurse anesthesiologist. So a lot of folks, that's who owns the clinic along with maybe a therapist because that state allows that. So it's important to also look at your state laws, practice of medicine, who can administer and prescribe the medicine. Now, that's for ketamine. What we're anticipating, because I am anticipating that MDMA will be approved at some point. So what will likely happen with MDMA is that if it gets approved, when it gets approved, there will be something attached to it. It's called a REMS. Now, there are certain drugs out there today, many of them are like oncology drugs that have something called a REMS attached to it. And that is really a very long list of things that the physician has to do to keep folks safe, right? So it's usually with medicines that have a tricky safety profile. It's arguable whether MDMA has that or not, but because it's been a Schedule I drug, we anticipate that the FDA will have a REMS attached to it. And likely what will happen on that REMS is that there will be a lot of requirements for what needs to be put into place within that practice. So that could be, you've got to have 2 therapists. You have to have a certain number of square footage maybe for the room that you're in. There's a bathroom attached, all these things that I think you all kind of know already if you've done this in the underground world and what that looks like to be an MDMA or a psilocybin or whatever therapist. So, I can't speculate at this point, but there will be some possibly fairly expensive requirements. And that will also include whatever the requirement is if you are going to be keeping, MDMA on the premises, for instance. So they'll have to be, it'll have to be locked in a certain way. And those are the DEA requirements. So you've got your federal requirements, DEA, FDA, you have your state requirements, the corporate practice of medicine, and that sort of thing. So that's kind of an overview, but I think those are, the main I guess regulations, statutes, things that we look for when we're chatting with somebody about, starting a practice.
Wonderful, thank you. I was on mute there. I feel like we have a tangential question here, and this relates to legal and also maybe some practice insights from Jeffrey. This question just came in from PJ. Can you speak to non-licensed folks working with folks doing infusions or home-based ketamine treatments, meaning that clients have their own medical provider, independent of someone providing the integration coaching?
Yeah, you know, so what I think I'm understanding is that maybe somebody does this ketamine, MDMA, whatever, with somebody else, and then you are going to be providing that sort of integration work post MDMA, not a problem. I mean, my own therapist does that work here in California. So that's not a problem unless, I don't know, unless there's some state. So the states obviously regulate you as practitioners if you are a licensed practitioner. Now, if you're like a coach or something, there's typically not a lot of regulations that go along with that. I don't want to say it's a free for all. If you all are here, you're responsible coaches. So, I think kind of I always say, like, you sort of want to follow maybe the rules that are set in place for licensed therapists, right? Those are there for a reason. And so following those, I think, are always a good idea. But not a problem. You can do integration work, and there is typically not going to be any legal issue from the perspective that someone has done something that right now is sort of federally illegal. Like, that's not going to then be imputed onto you if that's the question.
Can I clarify one thing real quick? Is that currently people are allowed to do telemedicine and have their lozenges, ketamine in lozenge form, shipped for at-home practice.
Yes.
And they can have anybody sip for them. I was wondering if that would be legal to apply a coaching practice or sitting, because they're legally have their own medicine.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a little bit of a trickier area from my perspective. I think ketamine is not as simple of a drug as I think folks sort of want it to be. Like, oh, there's really no side effects. There are side effects to it, and there are physical effects. So I think it's a little bit tricky. If you're wanting to be a guide for somebody, I mean, you can do it. And, I think the risks would be maybe tort law, right? Injury law. Again, you may be in a different state. So there'd be some challenges around jurisdiction and those kinds of things. So I think being mindful of the fact that if you are in a different state and you're guiding somebody maybe on some pretty big issues, typically child, traumas or war traumas and things, to just be mindful about. No, okay, yeah.
Not
but
therapy. No, not therapy, but sitting, being a sitter, which is very, very different.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're talking about ketamine, there's less risk. If you're talking about MDMA, I mean, could somebody sue you? I suppose, but for what? If you're just a sitter? I mean, there's really not a lot of legal sort of places. I mean, you're not doing anything as a licensed practitioner. Now, if you are a licensed practitioner, but you are sitting for them, it becomes a little trickier, because you don't want to put your license at risk by having somebody say, oh no, this person was sitting with me and then they did this and blah, blah. Now, we have seen some ketamine litigation, not a lot, but some litigation around the use of ketamine, both for mental health, but also outside of it. So more in terms of being in a hospital, someone's maybe been arrested, but they're brought to the hospital and using it as an anesthetic to calm people down. So there's that piece, but there's also for the mental health piece. We haven't seen a lot of litigation in that arena, but it's always possible. People like to sue in the US, as you know. So I would say, if you are a licensed practitioner, just be very, very careful if you are going to sit for somebody even in person, using MDMA or really any of those, especially Schedule 1 drugs right now, because you don't want to put your license at risk right now. Is that helpful?
And
Just a quick
Jeffrey, you have a little bit of practice experience in this?
Yeah, just a little bit of follow-up. I think that's a good kind of overview and legal lay of the land in terms of things to be considerate of. And mainly the caveat from my side would be that making sure you're within your own scope of practice so that you're not violating any sort of clinical standards by crossing over into the mental health line. I also want to touch on the business side that those models, especially when you start talking about integration coaching and not necessarily the sitting aspect of it, then you start getting into some cost modeling that's actually bringing price points down. So we're not talking about the legal, the ethics, the quality of care, but if you're talking about strictly financial model, if you look at it, at-home model with ketamine delivered via the mail with an integration coach versus a therapist, it significantly brings down the cost of the therapies. And we'll let the science kind of show whether or not that is ultimately a feasible model. But I just wanted to put that out as there is kind of an asterisk to the comment from a pricing standpoint. That model drops pricing.
Nice, thank you. All right, thanks for the follow-up question there, PJ. So we're going to move to psychedelic therapy finance question. Then we're going to get a question over to Steen about marketing. Is the pace, everybody going okay? You getting your questions in? Looking good. All right, so the question for Jeffrey comes from a licensed therapist. What is the best way to keep costs down? When starting up a psychedelic therapy practice, it's been tough to manage.
Alrighty, I'll take a crack at that. So I think that really, fundamentally, if you go at this like you would go at any sort of business or any startup, you're going to be looking at what is your overarching overhead, minimizing the initial expenses that you're looking to spend. So, and then in consideration, business 101, mostly personnel and your rents are going to be your largest outflows of expenditures. So if you don't need that office right away, kind of forego the office. Start with a small office if you really need to do in-person sessions, and then by all means use shorter term leases if you can get them. Teaser leases like 6 months or a year versus a 5-year lease. Keep the costs small when it comes to any sort of occupancy that you might have. Also, feeding into the movement post-COVID is the rapid expansion in telehealth, especially in the mental health care space. So consider telehealth only if possible. Now, if that's not your clinical model, by all means, get a small office, but telehealth by all means keeps costs down. Know your business model. Make sure that your business is, if it's a sole sole clinician, make sure that you have that business model down before you bring aboard others. So you don't, in business, when you scale, you don't want to replicate bad models. So really get your finances down for yourself. What's your bill rate? What are you paying yourself? What's the income that's left over after you run it through a preliminary P&L? And then make sure that that's able to duplicate before bringing on others. Also, let's see what else is there. If you're going to bring on others, look at a 1099 versus an employee. They're going to be cheaper options for you. There are legal distinctions there. You can't boss that person around, but 1099 is an option for reducing labor costs. I would say this is from kind of years of experience consulting with people that, pay yourself, even if it's a minimum wage to get going, because it could take years for you to kind of build that into your model. And you got people practicing for years without getting a salary. So, just at least carve out something there for yourself and make sure that you hammer it out on the revenue generating side so you can at least pay yourself a little itty bitty something when you get started. So it's part of your common practice moving forward. Other things would be doing things yourself where possible. You will need, as you grow your practice, billing, scheduling, payroll, marketing, all kinds of supports that are out there. But if you can do it yourself when you get started, the DIY mentality will be helpful in reducing those costs. And it will also help you learn your operating model. So you'll learn, like if you do look to scale later on, build out your practice, you'll know the ins and outs of every single function that you're building out. So keep that in mind. And speaking of that, just to kind of like put it out there, when starting your practice, almost before you do any of this, start your credentialing process, because that takes a very long time. If you're working with insurance companies, if you're doing private pay or, strictly, psychedelic or ketamine cash pay, with the insurance companies, they could take you 6 months or longer to get credentialed. So, it's a slow roll. So start credentialing if you're going to work with insurance providers. I guess another one is don't let subscription creep into your finances. I mean, I'm guilty of this as well. You get on all these platforms, and it's like, oh my God, how much am I spending on all of this stuff? So, use freeware where possible, and only kind of subscribe to those services that are absolutely fundamental, necessarily essential for your business. And I think that's an interesting business model from the tech side as well. It's like, try it out if you really, really like it. And then, if you're so impressed by it, then buy the product. And I bought a number of products in that model as well. So I guess the key then is, when you have all those, prioritize the ones that are truly important, because they'll creep up into your budget. With practice management, you may use like a Simple Practice, or some people use Osmind in this space, like different practices. But I would say, for as long as possible, use spreadsheets, or, just do it yourself, and don't use the platform until you're really, really ready to commit to that cost, because it can be, especially when you build on multiple clinicians, it will be harder to extract and divorce and decouple yourself from that platform than it is to get into it. So make sure that you're truly ready to pull trigger with your practice management solution, and it's easy to enter and exit before signing contract there. So just be conscious of those vendors and those subscriptions when you're building your practice. Those are kind of the fundamental things that I may have missed a few, but I think those are the things that come to the top of my head when I would think about controlling costs during a startup.
I love it. And any quick thoughts for like solopreneur coaches who are doing more lightweight, not in the clinical? Any things for them to keep in mind?
I think that for those guys, mainly, I think it's a pretty shoestring operation. You can do it on the cheap. I think that maybe the hardest part, and Steen may be able to talk to some of this with marketing, is the client acquisition side. It may be easier for licensed therapists, to talk to insurance providers that have wait lists to kind of get clients. A little bit trickier for a untested coach to get out there and to hustle up the business. That's kind of a side conversation. That truly is kind of the thing that I would be like. Business is all the same, but the client acquisition might be harder.
Absolutely.
I have two other thoughts really quickly on the cost, just because I think these are really important. This is more for the licensed folks, but there are two things that I think also up front you probably will need to think about. So one is insurance, not the insurance that Jeffrey just mentioned, but insurance, malpractice insurance. So if you're doing ketamine, for instance, and you're doing it at a clinic, and you're sitting with somebody who's using ketamine, and you're a therapist, you need malpractice insurance that covers ketamine. And there are very few that do. So you need to be conscientious about that. It may increase the cost of your malpractice insurance. Now, of course, MDMA and all that's not legal, so no one's going to cover that. And then also, if you have a brick and mortar, you're actually in person, your costs for insurance covering that, your sort of business cost and injury cost and those sorts of things, which is a kind of can be a separate insurance, that also might get bumped up, because you're not just doing mental health therapy, but there's actually a medical component to it as well. Okay, so that's one piece. So checking with insurance providers. The other is your potentially costs related to attorneys. So there are many. Now, I work for a large law firm, so we're going to be a little bit more expensive, although my group does actually work with solo practitioners and startups to reduce that cost. But there are a lot of solo practitioner attorneys and folks who do have lower rates. Not too many that work in this field. But the reason I bring this up is because informed consent is really, really, really important in this area. And it may look different than your informed consent just for your regular practice, right? Your regular, and even, I mean, honestly, even for non-licensed folks, I think having an informed consent is just a good practice. And so having a lawyer kind of help you draft that can be helpful. Now, that's just mainly probably a one-time cost. And also there's other regulatory pieces to it. So I do regulatory outside of psychedelics. So I work a lot with HIPAA and privacy and those things that as a practitioner you already have in place, but there might be some additional pieces to it potentially. So just having somebody look at that for you and say, hey, there's a couple of additional regulatory pieces that we need to look at here. So sorry for interrupting you, Eric, but I wanted to make sure I got those in.
Yeah, and Eric, not to nosedive this, but I got a quick follow-up question then for Natasha, since there were questions in relation to guides and integration coaches. Are you aware of any sort of like coverages in terms of the malpractice world for those individuals, or any specific liabilities there for them? Is there any liability reduction?
I don't know of anything specific. I mean, the only thing that I know, and I've worked with some folks to put into place in the insurance world to put into place coverage for a folks' ketamine practice. So that's really all there is at this point, other than, aside from your kind of just general insurance and coverages that you will need just for your normal practice. And I don't really know of anything for, it's trickier with non-licensed folks, right? So, and that's not to say that they aren't important. I've worked with folks who are not licensed but are excellent coaches. So there's not a requirement in the same way that, as a licensed psychologist or therapist, you would want to have malpractice, but it might behoove you to take a look at it and have it. Because you're still always going to be at risk of a lawsuit. I mean, I was a litigator for a long time, so I come from that approach. I'm now regulatory, so I'm on the front end. But I've seen, folks on that end, and anyone can sue anyone again. So I think it's always good to at least look into it. If cost is an issue, I totally understand, but I think there's ways to keep your cost down as Jeffrey said, and just, look at what are the main things that you need right now? And what are the things that you can kind of push down the line?
Awesome. I love it. I love the depth, the detail. Thanks everybody for their expertise. And we're going to move to marketing. And this is one of the, if not the most common question, the million-dollar question for Steen. What are the best ways to get the word out about my psychedelic therapy practice and attract new clients? And that is often contextualized with, either the word psychedelics being kind of disfavored by algorithms, or compliance and what you can't say in marketing. So within that context, like, how do folks reach out? How do they convey those benefits?
Yeah, great question. So first off, is the aspect of organic social media. So obviously you want to have really good posts. You want to develop a content calendar and a schedule with that, where everything's being dropped. There's certain softwares, free softwares you can use that can schedule those drops as well. So there's the organic side, which is, just making sure you're staying on top of it. The other side is the paid side. So that's where, you would set up an account within Meta or Google or Pinterest or any of these platforms, and you can basically use those as well. The nice thing, so organic is only going to go specifically to the people who follow you, of course, or if it goes viral or if people share it, that's the only other way that it's going to break out. But with paid, it's specifically targeting. You get to choose where you're targeting. So you can go by interest targeting. So you can choose people in this location who are interested in these things, and the platform's going to find people who are similar. And so you can also do, you can upload lists. So you could also do a thing where you upload a list of past clients. Of course, if they sign off and everything's okay, that data is hashed, which means it won't be seen or anything like that. So there's no privacy issues. But you can upload these lists, and then you can create what's called a lookalike. So what that is basically telling the system like, hey, here's a list of clients that I had in the past. help me find people who are similar to them. And so that's called a lookalike. So you can also use these, and those are really beneficial depending on how big your list is, because the bigger the list, the more certain aspects that the platform is able to pick up. Again, this is all machine learning, but it's able to pick up different aspects of those people and try to find people similar. So the bigger the list, the better. And so that's a really good way of pulling in new clients. And the best way to do that, so of course, now you have the targeting, but then what are you showing them? And so the things you want to show them are things like testimonials. So you want to talk to your previous clients, and there's two ways to go about this. One, sit down with them and just get, a stabilized video. You can use an iPhone or anything like that, just to get a stabilized video of them talking about their experience. This stuff resonates so much more than if you're talking about what you can do for someone. When they see themselves in that other person, it means a lot more. They're much more likely to take an action and potentially become a patient. So that's the first one. And I guess another thing you can do is also you want to do testimonials which are UGC style. So you want to ask your client just like, hey, can you, while you're just at home, just take a video of yourself using your iPhone. Again, these are kind of, we call them scroll stoppers. They're just something where if you're just scrolling your Instagram feed or your Facebook feed, it's something that's going to instantly stop you, where it's someone just walking through their house, there's movement in the background, and it's like, hey, hold up. I just had my life changed by this, or whatever they want to say. Obviously, you don't want to say too much, but whatever they're feeling, whatever effect it did have on them, positive, and just have them walk through that and talk through that. And so you can use both of these videos, both as organic, like we talked about, where you just kind of post them like, here's an amazing testimonial that I got from my patient last month. Or you can also use it in paid advertising, where we can push that to the people who are interested in these things, who are in this specific state, and now they're seeing a testimonial video. So testimonials are a great route, again, for both organic and paid. Another one is educational. So, I mean, if of course, most of you are experts in your field, so it's about sitting down and thinking about, what is happening currently within the industry. What are some things that people are curious about hearing about, especially potential patients? So then you could just write a simple PDF document, or you could do a fun little quiz or things like that. But I think that a PDF based on educational content is really good, because again, we don't want to step on the toes when it comes to the policy issues that we can run into on Meta, like you were speaking to, Eric. So the policy issues are interesting right now, because the line is kind of being drawn every day when it comes to paid advertising. When it comes to organic, you can pretty much post whatever, as long as it's not terrible, but you can talk about anything psychedelics wise, you're fine. But when it comes to the paid side, Meta or Google, they'll shut you down really quickly. If you are, immediately saying like, hey, come try ibogaine, it will change your life. Like, you cannot do anything like that. That's, yeah. So, but you can be like, hey, there's this thing called ketamine, and here's an educational PDF that just fills you in on a little bit on it. So then they go to a landing page, they click the button on the advertisement, and it takes them to a landing page. Really simple, doesn't take too long to set up, where they can input their email, phone number, name, whatever it is that you're trying to get. So this is great, because now you have the initial data where you can now email them. And the nice thing about email is that you don't have any of those policy issues. Like, you can be direct, you can talk about ketamine, you can talk about MDMA, whatever it is, you can be very direct through email. But again, on the paid media side, let's just talk about Facebook, for instance. On that side, you have to be very careful. So again, breaking all that down, the two most important things are making sure, like, about organic versus paid advertising. And if you do want to do paid advertising, know that obviously costs money. That can be anywhere from $1 a day to $1 million a day. I mean, it's really dependent. Of course, Meta would prefer the $1 million a day. Yeah, so you want to focus on educational content and testimonial content. Those are definitely gonna, appreciate it, Henry. Thank you. And my boss is here, actually, Henry. I wish he would show his face. Anyway, appreciate it. And those are the two biggest things. I mean, there's a lot of other avenues that we can take when it comes to pulling in new people into the market. But for new clients, I think testimonials speak the loudest, and then followed by educational content.
I love that really practical kind of how-to context that, goes between the sort of organic, or paid and owned. Yeah, and for folks, the UGC is user-generated content. I think everybody knows that. Yeah, that was an amazing answer. We're at about the halfway mark here. I think we're pretty good on time. A question came in. I think it's going to be anonymous. The request was for this to be read anonymously. And the question is, quote, I completed a training in March that taught us how to provide psilocybin support services in Colorado, charging for our support services and gifting the medicine. I was told we were being trained on how to work completely within the National Mental Health Service laws and not a gray area. We were also provided with waivers that we could use for our business. I'm hoping to have those waivers reviewed just to be sure. So I think a concept test, and then the follow up there is this a service that you offer to have it directly done? So I think that question would go to you, Natasha.
Yeah, we're happy to take a look at any, legal documents, contracts, waivers, those types of things. Now, I'm, I don't practice in Colorado, so I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of Colorado law. But again, I will say that, I think Colorado is sort of somewhat similar to Oregon. There's sort of this belief that, oh, this is legal, which it is in the state, but again, it's not legal from the federal government's perspective. So I think always keeping that in mind, because I think, Eric, you said something like, that it's all sort of on the up and up. I mean, I'm just paraphrasing that really there's no risk to this, but there's always going to be a risk. Until this becomes legal at the federal level. But yeah, happy to, I'll drop my email in the chat, and, this goes for anybody here, we're happy to do a brief, 20-minute sort of intro call free, and then we can kind of talk about what, in terms of cost, we definitely can do acute sort of, we're just going to look at this one contract and it'll take me, an hour kind of thing. So yeah, happy to do that.
Yeah, and in Colorado, based in Denver here, we are seeing a lot of that model, and it is not being prosecuted. And the thinking, but with practitioners, is that it would have to be justified why that would be prosecuted ahead of things like fentanyl or other things that are having much more of a societal impact. And so it's technically legal, but as Natasha says, it could be picked up and prosecuted at any time, so there is that ongoing legal risk. But there are lots of folks doing that, both in individual and group practice. That does seem to be the model currently for the bold. All right. So we'll circle back then. Any new questions on that? That was a great question. Oh, and there was a follow-up comment here I'm going to go ahead and read, which is, I attended an information session for a program that sounded similar. They offered in which they were expecting clients to obtain their own medicine, and our role was considered risk management was the legal loophole. So yeah, that falls within sort of that harm reduction theme and category that's going strong. And I think that the best things the future will hold will be, lessons from the underground, which is going strong, but obviously the safety, the protocols, and the above ground medicalization is key to getting it out to folks. So if we circle back to questions that were submitted, the second question is a little bit similar to the first, but I think it's a legal question. It's how do I cover my bases legally if I want to use psychedelics in therapy, especially since the laws are kind of murky? So a little bit different from adding it. What are things that people can do to kind of cover their bases if they are going to practice? Is how I interpret that question.
Yeah, well, I'm going to say this. I can't answer that. And the reason I can't answer that is because I have ethical responsibilities that, from my sort of perspective in my state and that their perspective is we can't tell you the things that would allow you to sort of break the law, right? So really I can't answer that in terms of like covering, so I think the thing, to keep in mind, if you are, I think mainly it's for the licensed folks, is, if you're in a state that has legalized. So if you're in Colorado, if you're in Oregon, you're sort of less at risk. And I'm not saying it's zero risk. It's not zero risk, but as Eric just said, And even quite frankly, some of the decriminalized states where really what that means is that they're going to funnel resources to places other than, folks carrying, a little baggie of magic mushrooms, right? So, and I suppose you could include somebody doing, a dose of psilocybin in a session. But I think for the folks who are licensed, the risk is always that somebody will say, I was injured while, I was in this session with whoever. And so, as I was saying earlier about insurance and having those protections are really important. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you are doing something like psilocybin or MDMA, there may be an exclusion in that policy, right? So it's not going to say MDMA. Well, I guess it could nowadays, but it'll just say illegal activity. So being really having, either you looking at or having an attorney or somebody looking at those contracts that you have in place that are covering your practice generally is going to be really, really important. But I'm going to say the caveat is to not do it right now, except ketamine. You can do ketamine. And just, and I understand, it's really hard because these are for many people life-saving, but maybe doing only the integration right now, if that's possible, especially if you're licensed, because you will not be able to do this down the road if you lose your license. You could do it, I guess, in the underground, but you're going to put that license at risk, and you may not be able to legally do it down the road, which we need those practitioners. We really do. There's not a lot of people who I think who are licensed who and there will be more over time, but there's not a lot of folks right now. So we really need those folks. So just be really mindful that and cautious right now. So I hope that's helpful. Maybe it didn't totally answer the question, but it's the best I can do.
No, it's good. I mean, the message is protect yourselves, folks, right? The first thing you can do is stay in business. And I had, we had a comment to, it's a question as well. A follow-up question. What do you think of models like Journey Clinical that manage the medical side of ketamine prescribing, then connect with members of licensed therapists who may work with them via telehealth? It seems like a good model to reduce both costs and liability for licensed therapists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I'm not familiar particular, with this specifically, but I think as long as, folks are, following their state regulations, obviously, if there's ketamine being prescribed, that there's a DEA license attached to it, a legal DEA license, and those types of things. I think that's a great model. I don't necessarily have a problem, with telehealth and especially with ketamine. I mean, at least ketamine is legal. I think my biggest concern is just because ketamine does have an impact on things like blood pressure and heart and those things. But hopefully, on the medical side, they're doing their intake and making sure that these are folks who can withstand and be at home to do those. And there's some way of setting up in case there's an adverse, event that happens. But I don't have a problem with the telehealth kind of generally. I think it works. I mean, my own therapist is telehealth, right? I think it's opened up for people to be able to do these and get these treatments that they really need. Obviously, with MDMA, and I mean, I don't think those are a little bit riskier. Obviously, from a legal perspective, they're very risky, but I also think because of they have a different effect on the body and they're long term, you're talking about 6-7 hours potentially. I don't know that telehealth, if you're talking about taking the drug and somebody's just on there with you, sitting with you, I think there's a little more risk in that just from the perspective of a patient. Obviously, it depends on what they're dealing with, and MDMA may be less risky from a trauma perspective, or if you're not dealing with trauma, maybe there's some other reason that you're taking it. I don't know, but I do think those probably need to be in person. That's not my legal opinion, obviously, but I think those are riskier to do via telehealth. But I think ketamine, I don't have a problem. It's a short-acting drug. And if the dosage isn't super high, I think that can be an effective program.
Nice, thank you. And it looks like one more follow-up question from Atlin, which is, how can someone that isn't in the medical field have the chance to create a system, work within the medical field to get tested, and then hopefully implement into the medical system? Is this an unrealistic path in our society? I can leave that open to either Natasha or Jeffrey. Am I reading that correctly there? How someone's not in the medical field, can you create a system, work within the medical field, and then implement? So how can people who aren't clinically credentialed, how can they work with the clinical system best?
So I think, and maybe Jeffrey, you have some thoughts on this too, because I've talked a lot, but there are some programs, and then MAPS is one, Lycos Therapeutics, sorry. I can't, I just call them MAPS because that's what I've known them by for so long, so my apologies. But there are programs that where you can learn to be, for instance, a therapist, right? So a sitter, I should say, and how to do that in a way that reduces harm and really is more effective. So there are programs like that. There are also, I know some like Johns Hopkins and other folks are working on creating programs that within the medical field that you don't know that you'll necessarily have to be a physician or even a licensed therapist. I mean, stay tuned, but I would pay attention and look for those because you might be able to take some of those courses, and that might be very, very helpful. And then, you know, I think staying atop right now of everything that's going on and looking for, you know, and this is, again, this isn't a legal opinion, but where you, with your skill set, might be most effective. Is it helping go into, you know, underserved communities and helping to create a program that's set up there for, let's get folks who live in these communities licensed, trained, right? So maybe you're like a coordinator. I mean, I'm just making this up, but I think there are ways that over time you know, many of us can get involved. I'm going to do more pro bono work to help underserved communities, for instance. And you know, obviously I'm not a physician, I'm a lawyer, but I'd like to see the communities that need it most actually get this treatment. So is that helpful? And then I think Jeffrey has some thoughts too.
Yeah, I kind of would like to add to the just second the whole idea that there's a whole public health component, in which case you can work on systems health and not necessarily be a clinician in that model and do a whole lot of good work for communities that are out there. But when you're looking at direct patient care, I think there are interfaces with the healthcare system in, you know, say the evolution of what it is to be a sitter or a guide, to be in direct patient care with somebody with maybe some minimal training standards, you know, equivalent to like a CNA or a home health aide. The medical model will, I think this is almost a guarantee given, is the fact that, you know, the medical model will seek to shape this field in its own image so that, you know, these things that are out there are going to have to fit into the existing medical model in ways that are not necessarily revolutionary. Our healthcare system is extremely resistant to change. So you'll be looking at parallel credentialing for psychedelic practitioners and potentially some maybe end runs into the system as well, which could be, you know, as a coach, you know, specializing as a health coach and, you know, eventually bridging that with psychedelic coaching as well. So health coach is a much in demand field in the healthcare system right now, not necessarily a clinical credential, but has credible ramifications for an individual's ultimate like well-being and health in terms of managing diet, managing, you know, some you know, just you know, day in and day out activities, exercise, and things to create a holistic, healthier individual. So I think those, you know, in the sitter space, the guide space, and in like health coaching in particular, are two ways that I can think of off the top of my head that feed into the existing healthcare model or the soon to be future healthcare model.
Absolutely, love that. Yeah. So does that answer your question, Arlen? Excellent, nice. All right. So I want to move. We've covered a couple more kind of on legal and finance. One question that's intriguing. I'm going to send this to you, Steen. Is um, how do I create a brand? So the question is specifically is how do I create a brand that really sells the benefits and safety of psychedelic therapy, especially to skeptics? So I think one is convincing folks who maybe are new to psychedelic therapy, and two, how does the underlying brand support that?
Yeah, great question. And I think just starting off, I would lean into what we discussed initially, which are education and testimonials. Again, these are the things that are going to speak to the most to people who are interested, who might be a little bit hesitant on reaching out. Again, they see themselves in the testimonials more than anything, and then anything that's lacking from that, they learn in the education piece. So that's why I think it's really important for anyone who does want to dive into the marketing side, that it does take time, but it's worth the time if just once a week sit down for 30 minutes and decide like, okay, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm going to post, and it's going to be these few things, and here's how it's going to build my brand credibility, because that's the most important thing is that credibility. So yeah, I mean, like that's I guess was there any more to the question, or was that the whole thing?
I mean, that's good. I think, the idea of personal branding, right? It can one thing I really love about Tricycle Day is like just how really personal, how unique, how funny the writing is. It's one of the most kind of relatable and personal media sources out there. And so, maybe speaking to that brand, and how you develop that, why that works well, because I think it's conversational, it's funny, it's definitely not AI generated. Like that's one thing that comes through really strongly. So that type of branding, how can psychedelic therapists use your kind of positioning skills to improve their own personal branding?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that one I have to give all credit to Henry Winslow, who's on the call. If you see him, he's the owner of Tricycle Day, and he is the voice behind all of that. But I can speak to, its efficacy though. And that is that every other newsletter that you read out that isn't focused in or not everyone, but a lot of the ones in the psychedelic space are very specific to what's happening, and they give you the information and focus on that. And that's awesome. But Henry brings this style of more conversational. It just feels conversational. It's got some funny little things in here. Here's a meme of the week. In across most of the other newsletters that I have, I don't see that in the psychedelic space. So I think that's what really resonates and why Henry's able to expand that. I mean, I'm sure Henry, if you ever want to jump in, feel free to. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for why Tricycle Day. And I've talked with Henry about this, and it's funny because copy is also a big part of marketing, right? And it's not just the creative that you're putting out in front of people. It's about the words that you're listing. And that's where I think Henry, does such a great job with Tricycle Day. Is again, it's just conversational. It comes across like it's not some article with a lot of data behind it. It's just like, here's the facts. Oh, and if you want to click in, feel free to check this out. But we're just trying to give you a quick 5-minute read so you feel up to date. You can have a conversation in your day-to-day life. So I think that that's a really good way to come across, right? Because you come across as educational, but you're also kind of cool. You're hip. You're like, but still also data driven and data, and I think that's also very crucial as well, especially once you start getting into paid advertising campaigns where that data is the whole point of everything. And a lot of the times we'll go into these things thinking like, okay, this style is what's going to resonate. And as a media buyer, again, media buying is just the act of buying media on these platforms. You always think that like you have an idea of what's going to perform well, and 90% of the time it's not. It could be the exact same thing that worked so well for the last client, but you have to test a lot of different variations. So one thing I was actually thinking is like, I'm sure you guys all can see this Chelsea Trinka. Hello, Chelsea. Like that's a great example, her image, that's a great example of like an ad to test where it's like, okay, it has nothing to do with it, but it kind of catches eyes. It kind of pulls you away. It's like, huh, this is a very meditated cat right there. It's like, oh, this is a great test. It's kind of funny. It sticks out. It's not just focusing on the data, because if you just see a bar graph on an advertisement, you're going to scroll right past it so fast. But if you see a cat meditating, it's like, oh, what is this? I want to dive into this. So again, it's about stopping the scroll, as we call it. It's just because on social media, you're mindlessly scrolling or just like waiting for something to pop up, and you need something to pop out in order to stop and look at what it is, maybe then read the copy. So that's why the creative is the most important part before the copy or anything else. So yeah, when it comes to brand, I would say go be out there, think outside the box. Don't just stick to the data. Test things that are extremely unconventional. Hop on ChatGPT and have it generate some image of a cat meditating. You know, any of these things are great opportunities to go out there and test. And again, it all comes down to testing. In media buying, there is no, like I mentioned, you know, you can think something works really well across the board, but testing is the name of the game. The more you can test, the more different ideas, videos, statics, fun GIFs, testimonials, education, all these things. That's what's really going to push you over the edge. And then once you find like, okay, let's say it's the cat meditating, like that's the one that's performing so well. Now we'll turn off everything else. Now, how can we iterate on that cat image? Like, okay, what about a dog meditating or like whatever it is, and try to keep iterating on what's already working. So that's the name of it. You don't really know, it's hard to resonate with your brand before you know it. So that's why it's important to just test a lot of different theories. And if you want to be, I understand if you don't want to do the cat meditating or something like that, say you want to be very professional and everything like that, then you want to dive into like the psychological colors that stamp your brand as that. So you want to dive into a lot of psychological analytics when it comes to branding your business. But yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to it, but in the end, it's all about testing.
Nice. I love it. So, to a certain extent, be yourself, right? You mentioned like that's Henry, and so that's why that comes off that way. And so, one rule of the branding is to be yourself, which, you know, dovetails with what Jeffrey said earlier about, you know, make sure your business resonates with who you are. And so, tying those things together works well. And then in being yourself, be uniquely yourself, and within that unique content, whatever resonates, kind of repeat those themes and go deeper. And the sort of just a quick playbook on branding. That's wonderful. Thank you, Steen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the big thing there is just, you know, don't assume that you even know your brand. Let people kind of figure it out with you. Of course, you want to have like be solid in who you are and everything. But when it comes to the styling of it, be malleable, be flexible with how people interact with your brand and learn from that.
Nice. And we do have an offer. Henry Winslow, please do jump in. Please come live. We're honored to have Henry here. Hello.
Hey, I think Steen did a really nice job of handling that question. You know, for context, Steen is like the master of media buying, and that's the role that he plays on our team. So just to kind of step back and answer a more fundamental way of approaching designing a brand, I think, you know, sometimes we can get caught up in the tactics, but underneath all of that, you really need to figure out who you are and what you represent. And then that will trickle down into everything that you do, whether it's paid media buying or organic social media or writing a newsletter, you know, whatever the case may be. And so the way that I think about creating a brand is, yes, to both of your points, like what is authentically me? Because that's going to be like anything else could feel manufactured or engineered. But the real reason that being authentic and being yourself works is because it naturally attracts other people who are like that, right? So if you want to reverse the roles there and think more about who your desired customer or client or patient is, that's another way in. And that is really the more traditional way to go about brand design. So the questions you could ask there are like, you know, to figure out who your ideal customer persona is, it's like, what are their pain points? What are their dreams, their aspirations, their goals? And specifically, like, what is the language that they use to describe those things? And when you have a very crystal clear idea of all of those questions, you know, what makes them tick? What are their pains? What are their objectives? And how do they speak about it? That all informs your copy. So for me, you know, using the example of Tricycle Day, it is authentically like how I speak and how I want to write because that makes it fun. But I'm also thinking, okay, there are many other people out there who are like me and they're looking for information communicated in this way. And so I'm just going to attract those people. And, you know, so I think the takeaway there is not that you need to be conversational or you need to speak in memes or humor or anything like that. It's just that you should speak in the way that you want. You should speak in the way that is going to be received by those you are trying to serve.
Nice. So get in their shoes, think how they think, talk how they talk, and don't be afraid to get specific. In branding, there are folks that you would specialize in, and sometimes a business decision that can be, you know, a little bold because you want to help everybody, you want to have the broadest market, but actually getting specific really helps pull in branding and marketing. Amazing lesson. And thank you for being here, and thanks for the boost. Everybody here must know Tricycle Day. If you're not subscribed, please do. One of the amazing sort of success stories in marketing, the way they started up the newsletter. There's been case studies, so they know what they're talking about, and they're getting it done in psychedelics. So thanks again, Henry, for joining.
Thank you.
And then did we have another one come in? All right, we had a little bit in the chat, which is asking about certifications. So Jeffrey, so Chelsea asked, is health coach an actual certification, or is it more like how anyone can go out and call themselves a coach? And Jeffrey answered that, health coach. Do you want to answer that one, Jeffrey, just so we have it on the record?
Yeah, so ultimately, there are multiple certifications for a health coach. And I would say that the majority of people that are hiring for that position would require certification, just one certification, like there are many to choose from. However, you might be able to do an independent practice, I'm not sure, and call yourself a health coach. I then suggested that, you know, life coach is actually a more, I guess, a lenient descriptor that people are using without any sort of hard press to credential, although I'm sure that many life coaches would say, yes, you need to be credentialed as well. So the credentials are there, but I think that probably there isn't a whole lot of, and this might be a Natasha question, a whole lot of legal framework for calling yourself a coach, what is and what isn't a coach. So there's not a lot of, you know, pressures there in terms of how you define yourself from my understanding. So that's what I got on that.
Yeah, and I would just add that's exactly right. As far as, you know, I'm aware, there are not any like, there's not like a legal framework in the same way that becoming a licensed therapist, and, you know, state laws that regulate. Now there may be some states, because coaching is so popular now, that are starting to regulate. So you do want to be aware of, you know, whatever state you're in, that there potentially could be some regulations that you might need to follow. The one thing that I'll add to, because, you know, I've been talking a lot about licensed therapists, because that's sort of from a legal perspective, that's where I think about where the greatest risk might be. But one thing to think about, what if you are a coach, and this is kind of more of a plug for the coaches, is that you do have a little more leeway, if not maybe a lot more leeway, in terms of how you're working with your client. You know, there are so many different regulations and ethical rules that therapists have to follow, and they're there for a reason. We all know what happened with the MAPS issue in Canada, with that male therapist, and that's why a lot of those regulations are in place for therapists. So a lot of therapists, for instance, really struggle with whether or not to use touch, and I'm talking about good, you know, therapeutic touch, obviously, in their practice. And you know, when you are doing, when you are a patient, taking a psychedelic touch can often be incredibly important. So as a coach, if you are, you know, going to be a sitter for somebody, even like in ketamine, which is the only legal drug right now, you know, that there are a little bit, you have a little bit more leeway when you are working with your client. So. Yeah, I would say PJ, that's correct. PJ said, I've seen a lot of therapists are now offering coaching as well, perhaps to avoid licensing issues. I think there's really that sort of, yeah, that risk of malpractice and things like that. But if you are a licensed therapist, I do think you need to be careful, because you are now in this dual role. And so there may be confusion about what role you are actually playing. So having things like informed consent as to what you are doing with this particular client are going to be really important.
Thank you.
That's a good point. Thanks, Pete.
And we have a question from Michael. Michael.
Yeah, thank you. This is really informative, and I appreciate your guys' time. Just have a few curiosities around, what do you guys typically see businesses registered as that are advertising psilocybin kind of retreats and things like that?
So it sounds like a marketing question. Yeah. Did you catch that, Steen?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't have an answer because usually I'm at the marketing side. We don't really have the affiliations with the companies in that way. We just talk to their marketing team and try to fill them in. So I'm not sure how their businesses are set up, unfortunately. I apologize.
Gotcha. So on the legal front, what do you have any, insight on what some of those businesses kind of look like, Natasha?
I mean, if you're asking, is there a way to sort of register so that you're doing just sort of retreats and you're not really sort of advertising like, hey, we're doing psilocybin. I mean, there's not really like a legal issue in terms of how your business is being registered. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily do the business side of things. Oftentimes actually, because a lot of our practitioners want to save money, so we just tell them, go down to your county office and you can register your business. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have a specific like way that you have to or is a better way to register. Now there may be tax reasons or other reasons, and I don't know, Jeffrey, you might be able to address that piece, but just purely from a legal perspective, in terms of is it better because you're doing psychedelic therapy to do it this way or that? I don't think so.
Gotcha. Because I'm just curious about how that's set up because are companies setting up their businesses as ketamine kind of practices or clinics or retreats and then also facilitating psychedelic kind of therapies there, or are they just, I'm just curious, where would somebody start at square one if they wanted to pursue this type of business? Are they what do they register as?
Well, from a perspective of just like you have a business name and you just register that, right? So how you're registering your business isn't, I mean, whether or not you're doing something legal or illegal, I mean, your name is going to be your name. So if you're like, um, you know, uh, whatever Psy Retreat Center, that's just going to be your name, and it's not going to have any kind of impact in terms of, is the DEA going through and looking and, this looks like a psilocybin and I'm going to go after them. So there's not, from that perspective. Now, in terms of like ketamine, I mean, again, I don't do the business. I very rarely do the business side of things. That's just not my forte. But yeah, I mean, folks are registering their business. They are legal ketamine practices. Again, they're following, at least if they're coming to me, they're following all of the state corporate practice of medicine laws and those types of things. I'm going to say to you, look, you can't do it if you're doing MDMA or psilocybin. From a legal perspective, you don't want to do it, right? It's not legal and you don't want to get caught. Now, if you're in Colorado or Oregon, I mean, I would say if you're in Oregon, I don't know what state you're in, Michael, but if you're in Oregon or want to practice in Oregon, go talk to the folks who run that whole program, okay? And same within Colorado. I think there's they're setting up some program there. And there's other states like Texas and a few others, surprisingly, are actually looking into that as well. So I would say go to those folks and talk to them. I'm going to pass to Jeffrey just in terms of if you're talking about like just purely setting up your business. I think he's going to be the one that can talk to you about how do you do that and what are the implications of that from a, sort of business perspective.
Yeah, just kind of hit it real quick. It really depends on what is the market vertical or the segment that you're looking to kind of dive into. Natasha indicated the ketamine clinic and corporate practice of medicine. That's going to be very difficult for you to get in unless you're affiliated or willing to kind of have ownership of a medical doctor in the practice itself. So ketamine itself is challenging unless you're a doctor. In the retreats front, you see two different avenues that are emerging, which are like national and international. International being subject to international laws and national subject to state and federal laws here. In that front, there are a lot of, I've seen not-for-profits kind of recently that are in that space that are kind of operating as facilitators of shamanic activity with like, I guess ostensibly some sort of religious kind of backing or some sort of religious exemptions to laws. So that's out there as well. And then say the one I'm most familiar with is the therapeutic mental health side, the integration side, the coaching side, where you have a practitioner that is kind of working with someone in the ability to kind of, process a psychedelic experience and then use that as a method either to exist an existing healthcare condition, mental health care condition, or in order to, maybe seek some performance enhancement in their life or be able to ultimately grow as an individual. So that's another segment as well. In addition, I mean, there's pharma. The pharma is part of this business, a big part of this business, as well as marketing companies, all the companies, finance companies, the companies that are supporting all of the practitioners that are out there as well. So there's direct clinical practice related to medicine and the support of medical intervention, and then also the business support functions that are all over this industry that are popping up to support businesses as they do in other healthcare and related sectors.
And I'll just add to that because Jeffrey, you mentioned something that I think is actually really important, the church exemption. It is really, really difficult to legally get a church exemption. It rarely happens. And I know folks lately have been trying to explore or wanting to explore that, but it is not an easy ask. And it's very rarely granted. So it's not really an option. From my perspective, I don't think it's a really a cost-effective way to go about this. So, really, if you're wanting to get into this, and I think, Jeffrey is right, like if you want to get into ketamine, you've got to, for most states, not all, but many of the big states where you're going to get most of your clients, you're going to have a physician who owns the practice. And if you're going to do it like retreat centers and things like that, it will be illegal. And we'll say we have seen, not necessarily here in the US, as far as I know, issues, like where, government entities are coming in and there's issues with somebody getting hurt. We've seen this outside of it. We've seen folks, die in some of these retreat centers, mostly doing ayahuasca because it interacts with MAOI inhibitors, and sometimes folks aren't either honest or don't know that that's a big issue. But there are retreat centers that do other things that have gotten folks criminally in trouble. I'm thinking of one in particular. It was what are those called? Where you go in and you are in that heat. You sit in those heat areas, what's that? Sweat lodge. Thank you. The sweat lodge, and some folks died. I think that was in Arizona. So these are not without legal risk in many different areas, including the fact that, MDMA and psilocybin are not actually legal. So just putting that plug out there for the legality of things.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, and I just had one other question for Jeffrey in regard to insurance and billing. You mentioned this briefly in the beginning of the call, just on insurance and billing. Typically, when you see these businesses, what are they billing insurance? Are they billing therapeutic services? Are they, what does that look like?
Yeah, so unfortunately at this point, so I'll start with ketamine space. Ketamine is being used in an off-label fashion. It's been prescribed and sanctioned as a a sedative or I don't know what the correct medical term is, but in terms of putting someone under sedation, it is being used to treat treatment-resistant anxiety, depression, etc. But the insurance companies in general are not providing coverages there. There are interesting avenues now whereby companies like Advaya are providing, riders to insurance companies in order to kind of allow the companies themselves to offer ketamine therapy. But for the most part, insurance companies are not covering ketamine administration or integration, for that matter, as a method of reimbursement due to the fact that it's being used in an off-label manner. Secondly, the insurances that I am talking about specifically are, when you look at mental health treatment and mental health conditions from the scope and lens of a psychological practitioner or a psychotherapeutic practitioner, so a social worker, licensed counselor, LMFT, psychologist, etc. Those individuals have mechanisms in order to reimburse insurance companies through existing bill codes and the ability to credential and contract with insurance companies for those treatments. So there's a big overlap, I think, between the mental health situations that people come into the psychedelic experience with, those that are looking for like mental health improvement, and then the crossover with existing mental health treatment and therapy, which is a tried and true pathway to insurance reimbursement. So those are kind of the avenues. So the ketamine side with medical, and the psychotherapeutic side, and really the only reimbursement from insurance in scale is the mental health practitioner via license and via agreement with insurance providers.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, really quickly, one of the avenues that you know that I think hasn't been explored in any great detail, but I don't know, many of you may be familiar with the parity laws, PARITY, right? So there's federal parity, and then there's state parity laws as well. And I've been working actually quite a lot. I've written or actually done some podcasts and things within the firm. If anybody is interested, I just did a podcast recently. I'm not sure when it'll be actually out to folks, but happy to send those to you. And it's not specific to psychedelics, but it does talk about the parity laws. And I do think this is a way that folks will be able to get reimbursed. It may take a little bit of a fight, but if you're not familiar with what parity is, parity laws basically say that if you cover, behavioral health, you need to cover it in the same way that you cover medical health. It's complicated. The laws are ridiculous. Nobody understands them. It's truly like nobody actually complies with the laws. And I'm talking about big, insurance companies, the Cignas, nobody knows how to comply. So there's actually a proposed new rule that came out in 2023, I believe. So the final rule should be out fairly soon. I do think it's a place to explore. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we sort of go along and try to figure out how we can get this, especially ketamine is important, I think, for the veterans population. And I know folks are working behind the scenes, some of the nonprofits, to try to get that covered under insurance. So if anyone has questions about parity, reach out to me separately. It's a very complicated law, but I do think it is going to be an important law here.
Excellent, wonderful. So we are at time. This flew by. This was very rich with details and content, and there's more to go in to. I think these will become a regular occasion. And we're also looking at putting together some coursework based on this. So just some foundational courses that address these issues and are updated with the current, legal developments and regulatory issues. So again, I want to thank Tricycle Day. I want to thank David Drapkin at Vital and Psychedelics Today. We're going to give Porta Sophia $100 for the kindness of these panelists being here. We covered a lot of wonderful stuff, and I think one of the big takeaways is protect yourself. I want to do a quick disclaimer. The information provided during this event is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal, financial, or medical advice. Always consult with a qualified professional before making any decisions related to your practice. You guys, now everybody on this call has somebody they know, so they got somebody in legal, you got somebody in finance, you got somebody in marketing to reach out to. And that's what we're hoping to do, is connect people who got questions with the folks who have the answers, so that we can get this life-saving, personally for me, life-saving psychedelic therapy out to folks as fast as possible. So thanks again, everybody. Look for a follow-up recording of this video. Look for follow-up events, coursework, and a lot more fun. Thank you to our panelists. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists? Yay! All right. And that is it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.